Rikers Island, New York's massive jail complex, just a few miles from Midtown Manhattan, and scene of a humanitarian crisis.
What are some words you'd use to describe Rikers Island?
Hell. Plain and simple, hell.
Benji Lozano recently spent 5 months in Rikers, serving the remaining sentence from a 1997 assault conviction after his recent parole from decades in state prison on a separate conviction.
What do you see in these pictures?
I see myself. I see everything that I experienced while I was at Rikers Island. I see inhumane conditions. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's ridiculous. Why is there not anything being done about what's happening at Rikers Island?
Photos obtained by the New York Post last fall show detainees jammed in the intake area. Lozano says he spent weeks living like this.
Feces all over the wall, unoperable restrooms, toilets would not flush, the sinks would not work. It was disgusting.
And you might be surprised who agrees with him.
People were living in inhumane conditions.
Until last month, Vincent Schiraldi was in charge of Rikers Island.
No recreation, health care was not available to people because we couldn't get them to their doctor's appointments. People weren't making court appointments on time.
Violence, he says, was rampant.
What would you say is the percentage of prisoners who have weapons?
You know, there were several units that were unstaffed completely. There was no correctional officer physically in the unit. And I can't remember looking under a sheet or a mattress and not seeing a shank under one of them. Because frankly, anybody would want one to keep themselves protected because there was no correctional officer to keep them protected.
NBC News recently obtained more than 100 hours of surveillance video from inside Rikers. Scenes like this, an attempted knifing averted by an officer, and an inmate-organized so-called fight night where some detainees were forced to participate.
Who was running the place?
The inmates run the facilities.
The footage came to light as part of a lawsuit brought by the New York County Defender Services on behalf of a client awaiting trial, who argued he should be released because of the unsafe conditions inside Rikers. In a groundbreaking decision in December, a judge agreed, finding the city's Department of Correction utterly failed to prevent the crisis at Rikers Island.
Under your leadership, was it dangerous?
I wrote to all the judges and all the district attorneys and said, I cannot guarantee the safety of people that get sent here.
Dangerous to inmates and for jail staff?
It was dangerous for everyone who was in there, for the medical staff, for the correctional officers, and for the people who were incarcerated there.
It's worth noting the majority of those being held at Rikers are awaiting trial and presumed innocent.
They're treated worse than many prisons in which people are fully convicted.
Was it possible to come to a place like Rikers and melt in and not be affected by any of this?
I don't see how that's possible. I mean, some people are heroes and they can withstand no matter what you throw at them, but the vast majority of people left Rikers worse off than when they came in.
An appointed federal monitor of Rikers recently reporting conditions have progressively and substantially worsened. Schiraldi says one of the most pressing problems, a union contract that gives officers unlimited sick time. He points out that of the more than 7,000 officers at Rikers, up to a third don't show up on any given day. For 6 years, Serena Townsend was in charge of investigating misconduct at the jail.
Was there a pattern of misconduct that you noted during your time there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. With respect to sick leave abuse, that was happening on a rampant level. People were calling out sick, and then when we would go and check on them, they were not actually at home sick, they were out. Once we started ramping up the investigations into the sick leave abuse, they just stopped calling completely, and they started going AWOL. So there were patterns of sick leave abuse and just not showing up to work.
In January, Townsend was fired by the newly appointed commissioner after she says he instructed her to get rid of 2,000 disciplinary cases against officers within 100 days, and she refused. The city denies Townsend's claims.
I investigated every type of act of misconduct. I also investigated every death of an inmate. And I have to say that a lot of what I saw in those cases are things that are happening that could have been prevented if we had staff in the jails. A staffing crisis, it permeates through the jails on every level. It causes people to potentially lose their lives, but it also causes searches to not happen.
Benny Bossio, the union president representing officers, accuses Townsend of being overzealous in her discipline of officers who are trying to do an impossible job.
I mean, look, we have officers that are out sick. 1,500 correction officers have been assaulted in the last year. We have officers dealing with long-term effects of COVID, being sexually assaulted. So, this notion that we're out on purpose is just nonsense.
There have been accusations, however, that there has been an abuse of a sick leave policy that essentially is unlimited, which you apparently negotiated. Do you acknowledge that contributes to staffing shortages?
The only abuse that has been happening is the last 8 years by the de Blasio administration of my members, basically neglecting Rikers Island and allowing it to fall apart. You can't have a system in place where we're being disciplined for everything under the sun, but inmates are assaulting us with impunity and there are no consequences or deterrents in place.
How would you describe the conditions at Rikers Island?
The conditions at Rikers Island have been inhumane. For the last 8 years, the de Blasio administration has basically allowed Rikers Island to rot. Not fixing the infrastructure, cell doors not being able to lock, not hiring correction officers in over 3 years, housing inmates by gang affiliation where you have one officer on the floor with 50 inmates. So they really put us at a huge disadvantage.
Finger pointing aside, everyone agrees that Rikers is horribly broken.
You did 25 years in a penitentiary. Was anything you experienced in prison as bad as what you experienced at Rikers?
I've experienced a lot of horrible things, but I think that was probably the most frustrating and the most upsetting thing I've ever experienced.
We as corrections officials should be apologizing for our role in mass incarceration, and I do apologize for that. It's been a terrible public policy. It hasn't achieved safety.
In a statement, a City Hall spokesperson tells NBC News in the month since new Corrections Commissioner Louis Molina took over, more than 1,000 officers have returned to work. In-person programming has resumed, and the statement says many of our officers have begun working normal hours again.